The low winter sun hung over the frozen fields of Mecklenburg as a grey transport truck rumbled through the gates of Erprobungsstelle Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's principal testing centre. Beneath a canvas shroud lashed with rope lay a prize so improbable that the men on guard duty leaned forward to stare. Painted in dull olive and scuffed silver, the aircraft had slid into German hands almost whole, a captured North American P-51B Mustang, the newest American long-range escort fighter, brought down in France after a forced landing. Its wings bore only light dents, its fuselage unbroken. For the engineers of Rechlin, who had handled fragments of enemy aircraft before but rarely an intact specimen, this was gold dust. Oberst Edgar Petersen, commander of the test center, was waiting in his heavy flight coat when the convoy rolled to a stop. He was not a man given to wonder, a veteran test officer from the days of the Ju-88. He trusted numbers, not rumors. But as the tarpaulin was peeled back and the sleek shape emerged, even Petersen felt a flicker of respect. The lines were alien smooth, almost featureless. It looked less like a weapon and more like an idea that had taken flight. "Bringt es guns hierin," he ordered. "Bring it in whole." He wanted this aircraft untouched by field mechanics and gossiping pilots. Whatever it was, it would reveal itself under Rechlin's lights. The Mustang was wheeled into Hangar 2, where the air smelled of oil, frost, and curiosity. Around it gathered a small delegation: Flight Test Engineer Dippel, Ing. Otto Behrens from the Aerodynamics Section, liaison officers from Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf, and half a dozen mechanics from Zirkus Rosarius, the Luftwaffe's travelling evaluation unit for captured Allied aircraft. Hans-Werner Lerche, Rechlin's chief test pilot for foreign types, stood apart, gloved hands in pockets, watching the ground crew unfasten the cowlings. Lerche had flown almost everything the enemy could build: Spitfires, P-42s, Airacobras, even a battered B-17. He knew the language of airplanes, and this one, he could already tell, spoke in a dialect he had not heard before. The engine bay came open with a metallic sigh. Inside sat the heart of the mystery, a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V16503, gleaming under a film of grime. The brass plate on the supercharger housing bore the neat American lettering Packard Motor Car Company, Detroit, Michigan. 2 stages, 2 speeds, a mechanical masterpiece engineered for power in thin air. Behrens whistled softly. "So they have married British brains to American factories," he said. Petersen nodded. "And they have done it in numbers." As the mechanics drained the remaining fuel and coolant, Behrens and his assistants began their ritual. Tape measures, calipers, contour gauges, every angle, every curve of the airframe recorded. The wing section, thin and deceptively simple, caught his attention first. Unlike the elliptical Spitfire or the knife-edged Bf-109, this wing was almost boring, straight-tapered, thickest near mid-chord. But when he ran his hand along the surface, he felt something extraordinary. No ripples, no proud rivets, only a faintly waxed smoothness. "Laminar-flow," he murmured, half to himself. "They have built the theory." The NACA 45-100 series airfoil, he had seen the papers smuggled through Sweden years ago. To maintain the flow, the surface had to be perfect. Here it was. Lerche crouched beside him, peering at the radiator duct that curved under the belly like the throat of a fish. "Strange place for a radiator," he said. "Wouldn't that drag?" "Not if they've done what I think," Behrens replied. He traced the curve of the duct with a pencil. Meredith-effect. The heated air exits faster, adding thrust. A radiator that pulls instead of slows. He looked almost offended. "We called it impractical." "Perhaps," said Lerche, smiling thinly. "They didn't ask permission." They found more surprises as the teardown continued. The landing gear folded inward, not outward, giving the Mustang a wide stance that promised stability on takeoff. The canopy was low drag, yet offered the pilot a clear rear view, something German fighters rarely managed. Even the propeller blades, broad and cuffed near the roots, spoke of a designer obsessed with efficiency. When they rolled the prop through by hand, the Merlin breathed with the precision of a watch. Behrens wiped his hands and said quietly, "It was built to fly far, very far." Petersen entered the hangar at noon, his notebook already open. "Gentlemen," he said, "I want a complete evaluation. Performance curves, cooling data, cockpit ergonomics, everything. The Americans are escorting their bombers deeper each month. I need to know if this is why." He turned to Lerche. "You will fly it as soon as the engine is cleared. Treat it gently. It may be worth more than any prototype we have." The next hours turned into a small carnival of technical pilgrimage. Representatives from Messerschmitt's Augsburg plant measured the cowling for fit comparisons. The Focke-Wulf men studied the radiator arrangement, taking sketches they would never show outside the room. A communications officer tested the SCR 522 VHF radio, marveling at its clarity. "No drift, no howl," he said. "They speak as if across the table." German HF sets could barely manage half that reliability. Nearby, an armourer inspected the 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns buried neatly in the wings. He tugged at the electric heating wires running to the gun bays and frowned. "They fight the cold before it fights them," he said. "We just curse it." That evening, with the hangar doors shut against the snow, Petersen called a brief meeting in the observation gallery overlooking the Mustang. The aircraft rested under floodlights, an alien visitor dissected but not yet understood. "Gentlemen," he began, "this machine is not remarkable because it flies faster than ours. Perhaps it does, perhaps not. It is remarkable because it looks like industry. Look at the rivet work, the access panels. Every piece is built for repetition." He tapped the table. "If they can build 1,000 like this for every 100 of ours, numbers will decide the sky." Behrens spoke up. "It is not only numbers, Herr Oberst. They have designed for the man who must fix it in the field. Every panel can be removed with one tool. The wiring looms are labelled. It is as if they expected the aircraft to be handled by mechanics who have never seen one before, and yet it would not matter." Petersen's expression didn't change. "Then they are designing for a war of replacement," he said. "We design for a war of experts." Later, after the others had left, Lerche remained by the Mustang's nose. He ran a gloved hand along the smooth curve of the spinner and tried to imagine the pilot who had flown it, probably a boy from Iowa or California, brought across the ocean to ride escort over Europe. He thought of the Luftwaffe's dwindling fuel, the green recruits arriving from flight schools with less than 150 hours, the veterans lost over Italy and the East. He felt the future leaning over him from this foreign machine, and it made his stomach tighten. Outside, the snow began again, muffling the world in white. Inside, the Mustang gleamed beneath the hangar lamps, its olive paint catching the light like wet stone. To the Germans, it was a captured enemy. To history, it was something else entirely, a mirror, showing what the next war would look like. Petersen's final words that night echoed in the hangar long after the men had gone. "Tomorrow, Herr Lerche, you will take it up. Find out not only how it flies, but why it wins." And so the Rechlin engineers turned off the lamps, leaving the silent American machine alone with its secrets, waiting for dawn to come and the first German hands to coax it back into the air. The future had arrived, and it wore the wings of a Mustang. The morning air over Rechlin shimmered with frost when the Mustang rolled out of the hangar for its first German flight. Its olive-drab skin bore hastily painted black crosses where American stars had been, but the shape remained unmistakable. The ground crews kept their distance, as if proximity might somehow awaken its foreign heart too soon. Hans-Werner Lerche climbed the ladder slowly, clipboard tucked under his arm, his flight helmet under the other. Beneath the calm exterior of a professional test pilot, there was the prickling awareness that this was not just another captured aircraft. This was a glimpse into something ahead of its time. Inside the cockpit, Lerche found order and logic unlike any German design. Every switch was labelled clearly, grouped by function, gauges large and easy to read. The throttle quadrant sat neatly beside the trim controls, each lever moving with precision. No clutter, no improvisation, just purpose. "They've built it for a pilot, not an engineer," he murmured into the intercom. The ground controller's voice crackled back. "Alles klar, Lerche. You may proceed." The Merlin engine coughed once, twice, then caught with a deep, throaty growl that rolled across the airfield. It was a different sound, less mechanical than the Daimler-Benz engines of the Bf 109 seconds, more like an orchestra of power and restraint. The propeller blurred into motion, and the aircraft began to taxi, tail swaying gently on its narrow path. Mechanics leaned on their spanners, watching the alien silhouette move under its own will. At the runway threshold, Lerche paused for a moment, glancing at the instruments. Oil pressure steady, coolant temperature rising through the green arc. He advanced the throttle slowly. The Mustang surged forward, its wide landing gear keeping it steady as it gathered speed. "It runs, straight," he noted. No torque roll, no fight in the takeoff. At 120 kilometers per hour, he eased back gently. The P-51 rose cleanly, as if it wanted to fly. At 3,000 meters, he leveled off and began to test her responses. Control harmony, nearly perfect. Roll rate crisp, with a hint of resistance that told of balance rather than stiffness. The elevator light but not twitchy. The rudder steady, well damped. It was an aircraft that invited precision, not brute force. "It doesn't demand skill," Lerche said into his recorder. "It rewards discipline." Climbing higher, he pushed the throttle forward. The Merlin roared, and the manifold pressure gauge crept towards 60 inches. The Mustang climbed through 7,000 meters with no sign of struggle. German fighters Bf 109Gs and FW 190As could reach such altitudes, but they gasped for air up there. The Merlin, with its two-stage, two-speed supercharger, sang. Lerche grinned involuntarily. "So this is how they do it," he whispered. "They breathe where we choke." He leveled off at 8,500 meters, throttled back, and began to explore the speed envelope. In a shallow dive, the airspeed indicator climbed rapidly 550 kilometers per hour, 600, then 650. The controls stiffened, but the aircraft remained stable. No violent buffet, no warning shudder. Only a faint whine from the radiator scoop as the air rushed through it. He pulled gently, and the Mustang responded smoothly, trading speed for altitude like a glider. Back on the ground, engineers recorded every word from Lerche's dictation. When he landed 45 minutes later, Petersen and Behrens were waiting, notebooks in hand. "Well?" Petersen asked. Lerche removed his helmet and exhaled. "Gentlemen, it flies like the future," he said. "It does not ask the pilot to be a hero. It asks him to understand energy." In the debriefing room, he elaborated. The cooling system worked flawlessly, temperatures stable even during climb. The cockpit heating was excellent, the visibility superb. "At high altitude, it feels alive," he said, "and it dives faster than anything we have, even the Focke-Wulf." Behrens tapped his pencil nervously. "And the laminar flow?" Lerche nodded. "Real. The wings are quiet, even past 700 kilometers per hour. There's less drag than the numbers suggest." By evening, word of the test had spread across Rechlin. Pilots and engineers whispered in corridors. One mechanic from the Zirkus Rosarius unit remarked, "It's as if the Americans skipped ahead 2 years." The Messerschmitt liaison, clearly unsettled, confided to a colleague, "If they can make them in quantity, we are finished." Petersen convened a late meeting that night. On the blackboard behind him, someone had chalked the Mustang's climb rate, range, and service ceiling beside that of the Bf 109 G6. The comparison was brutal. "You see?" Petersen said, his voice calm but tight. "They have built not only a fighter but a system, range over 2,000 kilometers with drop tanks, speed 700 at altitude. They will soon escort their bombers to Berlin." He turned to Behrens. "How soon can we duplicate the radiator effect?" Behrens shook his head. "Not soon enough. It requires manufacturing precision beyond what our shops can sustain now." "And the supercharger?" "Impossible without British metallurgy," Behrens admitted. "We cannot match the high-altitude efficiency." Silence hung in the room for a long moment. Outside, the snow fell steadily against the windows, muffling the night. Lerche, seated near the back, finally spoke. Then we must hope they build them slowly. Petersen closed his notebook. They won't, he said. They are America. They will build them faster than we can shoot them down. That night, the engineers returned to their barracks uneasy. The captured Mustang lay under guard in its hangar, frost gathering on its wings. In the lamplight, its lines seemed almost to glow an omen in metal and rivets. The Luftwaffe had seen the future, and it was painted in olive-drab. By dawn the next day, the airfield was silent, but for the low rumble of generators and the occasional clatter of a dropped wrench. The Mustang stood in the center of the hangar like an exhibit from another century. The engineers, sleepless and half-frozen, circled it again, not out of duty, but disbelief. They had seen many captured aircraft before: Spitfires, P-42s, even a B-17 tail section. Those were admirable machines, clever in places and crude in others. But this one, this P-51, refused to reveal weakness. It was as though every line of its design had been drawn with knowledge the Germans had not yet earned. Behrens crouched beside the wing root, running his fingers along the seam. "Look here," he said to his assistant. "No irregularities, not one rivet head proud. They have filled and polished the panel joints to keep the flow attached." He gestured for a straight edge, then measured the surface deviation across a meter of cord. "Less than 3/10 of a millimeter," he said softly. "This is not craft, this is discipline." At a nearby workbench, two Messerschmitt engineers argued in low tones. "They cannot hold tolerances like this in mass production," one insisted. "Perhaps a showpiece." The other shook his head. "We thought that of their B-17 seconds, too." Then they filled the skies with them. Over by the engine stand, the Packard-built Merlin rested like a mechanical heart waiting for surgery. The mechanics had drained it overnight, and now examined the supercharger assembly, an intricate, two-stage, two-speed unit that gleamed even under the dim hangar lamps. One mechanic, a veteran who had spent years cursing the complexity of the DB-605, whistled when he saw the arrangement. "They have built an orchestra into a box," he said. The American metallurgy, clean, bright, uniform, spoke of industrial confidence. No rough castings, no tool marks. Every component was finished as if it mattered. Petersen entered just after sunrise, coat buttoned tight against the cold, clipboard under his arm. He stood for a moment, taking in the scene. A dozen German engineers circling a captured American machine like monks studying scripture. "Well," he said, "has it begun to confess its secrets?" Behrens looked up. "It confesses too much, Herr Oberst," he replied. "Everywhere we look, it tells the same story: efficiency. The wings, the cooling ducts, the landing gear, even the canopy latches. It is as though they designed not for performance, but for production and reliability, and achieved both." Petersen approached the radiator scoop beneath the fuselage. Inside, he saw the carefully contoured ductwork, the Meredith-effect system Behrens had described the previous night. The airflow converged through the radiator core, then expanded again in a jet of heated air that could, under certain conditions, produce thrust. "Ingenious," Petersen muttered. "A cooling system that helps you go faster. We have engineers in Augsburg still arguing whether that's possible." "Possible," Behrens corrected him, "and proven." He pointed to a set of notes on his clipboard. "At 400 miles per hour, the gain nearly cancels drag. At 500, it adds measurable thrust. Their cooling losses become propulsion." He hesitated. "We dismissed the theory as impractical because we assumed too much precision would be required." Petersen raised an eyebrow. "And they achieved that precision?" "With factories," Behrens said simply. "Not with genius." At 10 o'clock, Lerche returned to the hangar, still exhilarated from his first flight. The engineers clustered around as he described his impressions. "It handles like no other aircraft I have flown," he told them. "It does not punish mistakes. You do not wrestle it, you direct it. It climbs strongly, turns steadily, and when you dive, it keeps its manners." He gestured toward the wings. "At 700 kilometers per hour, I expected the controls to lock. They did not. It speaks to you through the stick. Not loudly, quietly. A pilot who listens will never be surprised. Did you feel compressibility? Asked Behrens. Only the beginning of it, Lerche replied. But the warning comes gently. The aircraft forgives impatience. He paused. Our Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts fine fighters, but temperamental. They are like thoroughbreds. This one is a machine horse. It will carry an average man across the world. The room fell silent at that. Everyone understood the meaning. A fighter that required no exceptional pilot, that could fly long and fight well. Such an aircraft could win a war by itself. Petersen nodded slowly. They have built a democratic airplane, he said. An aircraft for the many. Later, when the engineers moved to inspect the cockpit again, they found more evidence of this philosophy. The layout was logical, intuitive, every essential control within reach, labelled in clear type. The seat was adjustable. The canopy offered almost panoramic visibility. A pilot can see, Lerche said, running a gloved hand along the plexiglass frame. No blind spot behind, no armoured hood trapping him. He looked at Behrens. They built this so the pilot feels safe enough to fight smart. By afternoon, the evaluation board began drafting their preliminary findings. The summary was concise but damning. The North American P-51B represents a synthesis of aerodynamic efficiency, mechanical reliability, and industrial scalability unmatched by any known Luftwaffe design. Its laminar-flow wing, low-drag cooling system, and superior high-altitude performance enable both long-range escort and tactical combat. Maintenance, simplicity, and cockpit ergonomics suggest deliberate prioritization of pilot endurance and production uniformity. The design reflects a nation fighting an industrial war, not an artisanal one. When Petersen signed the report that evening, he added a private note at the bottom margin. If the enemy has thousands of these, the outcome of the air war is no longer in doubt. Outside, snow drifted across the runway, settling in pale ridges along the Mustang's wingtips. Inside, the engineers packed away their calipers and notebooks in silence. The day's work was done, but the unease it left behind was not. They had looked into the engine of the future and found that it spoke fluent English. Snowmelt turned the Rechlin airfield into a pale mirror of sky. The captured Mustang sat on a wooden platform under canvas, its green paint dulled by frost and exhaust stains. Officially, it was known now as T9+CK, a Luftwaffe test code reserved for foreign aircraft. Unofficially, among the mechanics and engineers who tended it, it was simply Das amerikanische Tier, the American beast. Each morning, the engineers gathered in Hangar 2 for flight data reviews. The Mustang had been flown half a dozen times since February, each flight confirming what the first had suggested, that the Allies had not only matched Germany's best, but had already surpassed it. The tests were carefully logged: climb performance, cooling efficiency, acceleration curves, but the numbers were beginning to feel less like measurements and more like sentences. Hans-Werner Lerche entered the briefing room just after 0900, still wearing his flight suit. He carried a roll of film gun camera footage from a simulated dogfight against a Bf-109G flown by another test pilot. When the film was projected, the room fell silent. The Mustang, in slow motion black and white, accelerated through a turn and slid behind the Messerschmitt's tail with a smooth inevitability. "It flies by momentum," Lerche said, pointing to the film. "Our 109 loses energy the moment you turn. This one regains it." Behrens nodded, scribbling notes. "It is not faster in a single burst," he said, "but it stays fast. Their pilots can choose the fight." At the end of the table, Oberst Edgar Petersen tapped his pen impatiently. "So we have established that it flies well," he said dryly. "But can we counter it?" A silence followed. Behrens looked up from his notes. "With our current aircraft, no. The W-190A loses power above 7,000 meters. The Bf-109G climbs well but overheats quickly. The Mustang can stay at high altitude indefinitely. Its cooling system is beyond ours." Petersen frowned. There must be something. A weakness. Lerche hesitated. Perhaps the weight, he said. It carries much fuel, many systems. In a very tight turning fight, perhaps we could outmaneuver it. Behrens shook his head. We have seen the telemetry. Even there, the difference is small. And in the vertical, he trailed off, unwilling to say what all of them already knew. The meeting ended without conclusion. Petersen stood by the door as the others filed out, then turned to Behrens. When you look at that machine, he said quietly, what do you see? Behrens folded his arms. I see design by philosophy. We Germans build to master the air. They build to master the war. The Mustang is not just a fighter, it's a statement of method. That evening, the Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf liaisons departed for Augsburg and Bremen with copied data. They would relay their findings to design teams already working on desperate countermeasures. The high-altitude Fu 190D, the pressurized Bf 109H, none of them knew that by the time those aircraft reached the front, it would be too late. Lerche continued his test flights through March, often in grey weather that made the world seem smaller. He would climb through the cloud deck and break into the blue, the sun glaring off the long wings. At altitude, the Merlin's steady hum felt alive, responsive, almost intelligent. He tested its dive behavior. One afternoon, pushing through 750 kilometers per hour, the airframe trembling but holding together. The stick never froze, he wrote in his log. Compressibility begins, but predictably. The airplane warns you politely before it kills you. When he landed, his ground crew greeted him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She comes back like nothing happened, one mechanic said, patting the wing. Our 109 seconds would need half a day of work after that. That night, in the officers' mess, Lerche joined Behrens at a corner table. The talk was low and tired rumours from the Eastern Front, shortages, new Allied raids on Hamburg. Behrens toyed with his glass. They'll be over Berlin soon, he said. And now, they will have Mustangs to protect them all the way there and back. Lerche looked out the window, where the hangar lights glowed faintly through mist. When I flew it, he said softly, I felt something I haven't felt before in an aircraft. It doesn't fight the air, it uses it. Behrens smiled faintly. That's what frightens me, he said. A week later, a train left Rechlin carrying crates of documentation labelled Feindflugzeug P-51B, Untersuchungsbericht Nr. 41/44. Inside were aerodynamic drawings, engine performance graphs, and cockpit layouts destined for the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium in Berlin. The report's conclusion was stark. The P-51 represents a culmination of Allied design efficiency. Its range, altitude performance, and stability exceed current German capabilities. Countermeasures limited to tactical advantage at low altitude. Strategic implication, decisive. When Petersen read the final version before sealing it, he added a handwritten line in the margin. The enemy has already built tomorrow. The captured Mustang was flown one last time in mid-March, a short sortie to compare cooling performance against a Focke-Wulf D9 prototype. After landing, Lerche shut down the Merlin and sat for a long moment in the cockpit, his gloved hands resting on the throttle. The silence after engine stop felt heavier than usual. In the maintenance hangar that evening, the German mechanics drained its tanks, covered it with canvas, and logged it as evaluation complete. But long after the lights went out, a few of them lingered by the door, staring at the darkened shape under the tarp. One finally said what none of them dared to admit aloud, that one, they'll win with that one. Outside, the spring thaw had begun. The snow around the hangars turned to mud, and Allied bombers were beginning to fly deeper into Germany every week. Somewhere beyond the clouds, more Mustangs were crossing the channel, sleek, efficient, unstoppable. At Rechlin, the first German to fly one understood what they meant. The future no longer belonged to the Reich. It belonged to the machine waiting patiently beneath a German tarp, built by men who believed in endurance, not miracles. The first Allied daylight raids over Berlin came that month. From the windows of Rechlin's administration building, Oberst Edgar Petersen could sometimes see the vapor trails of the bomber streams, miles to the south, dozens of pale ribbons across the cold blue. The anti-aircraft batteries in the distance barked in futile rhythm. The thunder of their shells came faintly through the air, too slow, too late. By the time the black smudges of flak appeared, the bombers were already past. And now, in the thin air above them, there were fighters, slim, silver ones with wings like blades. He didn't need reports to know what they were. He'd seen the same shape in his hangar only weeks before. At Rechlin, the Mustang's tests were officially complete. The evaluation reports had been dispatched to the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, though Petersen doubted anyone there truly grasped what they meant. The ministry still believed in secret weapons, in miracle aircraft like the Me-262 or the rocket-powered Me-163. To them, the P-51 was just another foreign curiosity, but Petersen knew better. The Mustang was not a miracle, it was mathematics applied to mass production, a proof written in aluminum. That April, the Luftwaffe's fighter command began bleeding to death in public. The big week raids had crippled aircraft factories from Leipzig to Augsburg, and every interception cost more pilots than Germany could train. The few surviving veterans wrote terse reports about their new adversary. The tone had changed. Where they once mocked the amerikanische Langnassenjäger, the long-nosed American fighter, now they described it with grim respect. The P-51 dives like a falcon, one Staffelkapitän wrote, and climbs like it has two souls. In the hangar, Hans-Werner Lerche was preparing the Mustang for one final demonstration this time, before a delegation of officers from the Reich Air Ministry and the Jagdwaffe Inspectorate. Among them was General Major Adolf Galland, the head of the fighter arm, his face drawn from fatigue and smoke. He had come to see for himself the aircraft that his men claimed owned the high sky. As the officers gathered beside the runway, Lerche performed a pre-flight check. The Merlin engine started cleanly, settling into its familiar, smooth vibration. He taxied out under a pale spring sun and lined up on the strip. Petersen's voice came over the radio. "Proceed as briefed, Lerche. Show them what it does." Lerche advanced the throttle. The Mustang rolled forward, tail lifting easily, then leapt into the air. Within seconds it was climbing almost vertically, the engine note deep and sure. At 4,000 meters, he leveled out and began a high-speed pass over the field. The sound hit the observers first, a long metallic roar that seemed to vibrate the bones. The aircraft streaked overhead, sunlight flashing off its wings, and in the same motion it pulled into a steep climb, rolled inverted, and dived again in one continuous, fluid motion. Galland watched without speaking. When the Mustang leveled out again, it performed a sustained turn at high speed, tight, clean, with almost no loss of altitude. Then, after a brief pause, Lerche pulled into a shallow climb and cut the engine. The propeller windmilled silently as the aircraft glided the length of the runway, graceful as a bird landing on a lake. When he touched down, the officers were waiting. Galland walked forward first, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "So that is the machine?" he asked. "Yes, Herr General Major," Petersen said. "Captured in France in January." Galland studied the Mustang in silence. "How many can they make?" Petersen hesitated, then answered truthfully. "As many as they want." Galland's expression hardened. "Then the war in the air is lost," he said simply. The visiting officers departed that afternoon, their cars raising dust from the thawing road. Petersen remained by the hangar, staring at the departing convoy. "They'll dismiss it in their reports," he muttered to Lerche. "They'll say our jet will fix everything." "But we both know." Lerche nodded. "The jet can win a battle," he said. "The Mustang can win a war." That evening, Behrens completed the final technical brief for Berlin. His conclusion was short, unsparing, and written in the tidy script of an engineer who had run out of optimism. The P-51 achieves its performance through design integration, not excess power. Every system complements another. The laminar wing reduces drag, the radiator adds thrust, the Merlin engine sustains power at altitude, the cockpit promotes pilot efficiency and reduces fatigue. It is the first truly modern fighter designed by logic rather than instinct. The advantage is not temporary, it is structural. He handed the document to Petersen for signature. The commander read it, then looked up. "If we lose this war," he said quietly, "they will study our courage, but we will study their production." Days later, the Mustang was ordered to be crated and sent to Rechlin's secondary site near Lairs for long-term storage. Its tests were finished. Its verdict had been delivered. But as the mechanics tightened the straps around its wings, one of them paused, resting a hand on the cool metal. "It feels alive," he said softly, "even now." Outside, the thunder of distant bombs echoed over the horizon. Somewhere beyond that sound, hundreds of other Mustangs were already escorting flying fortresses deep into the heart of the Reich. They flew the same way Lerche had flown this one, smooth, confident, unhurried. At Rechlin, the last of the daylight faded from the hangar windows. Petersen stood watching the shadows gather over the Mustang's fuselage. "We built brilliance," he said to no one. "They built continuity." The wind rose across the empty runway, carrying with it the faint hum of engines from far away. And for the first time in years, the men of Rechlin understood what it meant to be on the wrong side of progress. By May, Rechlin had changed. The airfield that once hummed with confidence was now marked by caution and smoke. Allied bombers came within earshot almost daily. The engineers worked in blackout conditions, drawing their blinds when the sirens wailed, as though secrecy could keep the sky at bay. The captured Mustang was gone, now shipped to Lairs for storage, but its absence seemed to haunt the place more than its presence ever had. Every new aircraft that rolled out of the workshops, a Focke-Wulf long nose, a Messerschmitt prototype, even the sleek Me-262 jet was compared, silently, to the ghost of the American fighter they had dissected in January. Oberst Edgar Petersen walked through the testing hangar one morning, past a half-assembled FAW-190D and a pair of experimental Heinkel engines. The air smelled of oil and defeat. At the drafting tables, engineers hunched over blueprints of emergency, designs fighters that promised performance they could not deliver. Each was an act of desperation, a sketch of hope drawn against arithmetic. Petersen paused at one of the tables where Dippel, Ing, Otto Behrens was reviewing data sheets. "Any progress?" Petersen asked. Behrens sighed. "Only on paper. The Dora climbs faster below 5 kilometers, yes, but above that? The Mustang leaves it behind. We cannot cheat physics. The Merlin holds its power, ours gasps for breath." He flipped a page, showing the coolant system diagrams. "Our engines run hot at altitude because we rely on brute airflow. Their radiator, that Meredith system, still giving thrust, not drag. I've told Berlin 3 times. It's worth more than an extra 200 horsepower. They answer with slogans about the jet age." Petersen frowned. "They believe the Me-262 will save us." Behrens looked up, his eyes tired. "It might have 2 years ago, but they'll have Mustangs waiting over every airfield now, and jets don't climb from cratered runways." A silence settled between them, filled only by the distant drone of an air raid somewhere far away. Petersen finally spoke. "We Germans always think salvation is mechanical," he said. "We build miracles when what we need are factories." That afternoon, Hans-Werner Lerche returned from another test flight, this time in an FW-190D prototype fitted with a Jumo 213A. It was fast, powerful, and promising, but it felt like a relic already. When he stepped down from the cockpit, he found Petersen waiting beside the hangar. "How was she?" Petersen asked. Lerche shrugged. "A fine machine for 1,942. She climbs well, dives well, but she is still a brawler. The Mustang is not a brawler, it is a thinker. It carries the sky in its pocket." Petersen smiled faintly. "You speak like a philosopher, Herr Lerche." "Perhaps because I am running out of words as a pilot," Lerche replied. That evening, the 3 men, Petersen, Lerche and Behrens, met in the officers' mess. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke and quiet frustration. Outside, the sound of distant flak was a dull heartbeat in the night. Behrens poured a glass of schnapps but didn't drink. "You know," he said, "I've read their production reports. Allied intelligence leaks filter even to us. They build one Mustang every 75 minutes. Each engine is interchangeable. Pull one out, put another in, and it fits perfectly. We still hand-fit ours with files and hammers." Lerche nodded. "I've seen our factories. We rely on men who can feel metal. They rely on machines that never tire." Petersen set his glass down. "And yet we believed we were the engineers." The conversation drifted to silence again. Each man knew he was witnessing the slow inversion of history, the empire of craftsmanship yielding to the republic of mass precision. 2 days later, a small courier plane landed from Berlin, carrying a request from the Reichsluftfahrtministerium. All data on the Mustang was to be forwarded to Messerschmitt's design bureau for comparative study regarding high-altitude design principles. Behrens laughed when he read it. "Comparative study," he said. "We will study the stars while they take the sky." Still, they compiled the data and sent it. Among the documents was a single-page note handwritten by Lerche, attached to his flight report. The P-51 represents not an aircraft but a doctrine, one that values range, stability, and endurance above acrobatics. It is designed for the long war, not the duel. Every minute it flies, our supply lines shrink, and theirs lengthen. This is not a machine to outfly, it is a machine to outlast. When Petersen saw the note, he didn't alter a word. He simply signed beneath it and added the remark, "Forwarded for technical awareness." That same week, a new wave of Allied bombers passed overhead. For the first time, their escort stayed with them all the way to Berlin and all the way back. The Luftwaffe's radar tracked them, the flak guns roared, but the sky itself now belonged to the Americans. From the Rechlin control tower, Petersen watched the contrails vanish into the west. "They are not flying faster than us," he said quietly to Lerche, who stood beside him. "They are flying further." Lerche nodded, his gaze distant. "Distance," he said, "is the new weapon." As dusk fell over the airfield, the wind swept across the empty runways, carrying the faint echo of engines beyond sight. Somewhere high above, the same silhouette they had studied in January was tracing its silent arcs through German airspace, elegant, inevitable, untouchable. The engineers of Rechlin had looked into the future and found their reflection already obsolete. The Mustang had not only redefined air combat, it had redrawn the horizon. By the first week of June, the war had changed forever. Word of the Allied invasion reached Rechlin by radio before dawn. "Normandy Landung," shouted down the corridor of the test command building. Technicians abandoned their drawing boards, running to the operations room, where a shortwave set crackled with reports. Hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft, paratroopers flooding the French coast. The officers stood in stunned silence as the reality sank in. Germany's western wall had been breached, and above that vast invasion fleet, thousands of Allied fighters circled unchallenged. "Mustangs," someone muttered. "Hundreds of them." In the following days, reports from the front confirmed what Petersen and his men already knew. The Luftwaffe could no longer reach the battlefield. Allied air superiority was total. From Normandy to Paris, the sky was a constant grey hum of engines and contrails. German tank columns could move only at night. Trains ran sporadically, their smoke instantly spotted and attacked. And wherever the sky cleared, there was the long shadow of the Mustang. At Rechlin, Oberst Edgar Petersen gathered his senior officers for a final technical conference, part necessity, part ritual. Around the table sat Otto Behrens, the lead engineer, and Hans-Werner Lerche, his expression drawn, uniform, flecked with oil from his last test flight. The air smelled faintly of burnt aviation fuel, the byproduct of the new Jumo engines they had been running. "The Reichsluftfahrtministerium wants a full operational readiness report," Petersen said flatly. "For the Dora, for the Me-262, for the Ta-152. They still think we can regain initiative." Behrens gave a weary laugh. "Initiative? We cannot even reach the initiative." He tapped a sheet of paper covered with calculations. The Americans fly P-51 seconds from England to Berlin, escorting bombers at 30,000 feet. They return with fuel to spare. We can barely scramble half our fighters with enough range to intercept before they're over target. Petersen leaned forward. They think our jets will change that. The jets will die on the runways, Behrens replied. Every airfield within 400 kilometers of the front is under observation. The moment a 262 takes off, the Mustangs will be waiting. They are not just fighters anymore, they are hunters. Lerche nodded. I saw it myself near Magdeburg, he said quietly. 2 of our new Doras jumped a bomber formation. Before they could climb, 3 P-51 seconds dropped from above. 1 passed both down. The speed difference meant nothing. The Americans own the altitude. They choose when the fight begins and when it ends. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, the faint rumble of distant bombing rolled across the landscape. The sound was constant now, a background hum to every conversation. Petersen rubbed his eyes. Do you remember, he said softly, when we thought air superiority was about pilot skill? When we believed the best man in the best machine would always prevail? Lerche gave a humorless smile. We still have the best men, but they're fighting the future with the past. That afternoon, the Mustang's absence was felt more than ever. The engineers had grown accustomed to seeing it in the hangar, its smooth lines, its quiet defiance of everything they'd been taught. Now, its empty platform seemed like a warning. Behrens spent the rest of the day compiling his final report for Berlin. It was not a document of despair, but of truth. The P-51 is not superior in any single measurement, he wrote, but in its integration, it represents total design logic range, speed, and endurance unified by purpose. The American advantage lies not in genius, but in coherence. Each component, from the propeller tip to the tail light, serves the same strategic goal: control of the sky. We build for performance. They build for permanence. That night, Behrens left his desk and walked out onto the airfield. The horizon flickered with distant fires from a bombed rail junction. Above, the sky shimmered faintly with starlight and contrails. Always contrails, crossing east to west, like scars drawn across the heavens. Lerche joined him after a few minutes. They'll reach Berlin soon, he said. Behrens nodded. And when they do, they'll be escorted by the very machine we studied here. It will be our own report, flying overhead. The following week, Allied reconnaissance photos confirmed what the men at Rechlin already knew. The skies of Europe were filled with Mustangs. Over France, they strafed convoys. Over Germany, they hunted Me 262 seconds as they took off. Over every front, they dictated the rhythm of the air war. Petersen gathered his men one final time before his transfer to the collapsing front near Flensburg. Gentlemen, he said, we have built masterpieces, but the Americans built a system. That is why they will win. The room remained silent. Outside, thunder rolled not weather, but war. The air smelled faintly of fuel and resignation. As Petersen left the hangar for the last time, he paused beside the empty test stand where the Mustang had once rested. For a moment, he could almost hear it again, the even, steady hum of the Merlin engine, the sound of inevitability. He touched the edge of the platform, then turned away. Above the fading daylight, another distant formation passed overhead, tiny silver dots glinting in the sun. To the men below, they were no longer just enemy aircraft, they were the future in motion. And in that moment, the engineers of Rechlin, who had once believed they commanded the secrets of flight, understood the cruel symmetry of history. They had built for brilliance, but the world belonged to those who built for endurance. The sky, once theirs, had fallen silent. By July, Rechlin was a shadow of its former self. The test airfield, once filled with the sounds of prototypes, now lay silent under the hum of distant bombers. Every few days, fragments of the war rolled past columns of burned trucks from the east, exhausted Luftwaffe crews retreating westward. The occasional Me 262 seen streaking overhead like a comet, too fast and too few to matter. In a corner of the airfield hangar, Oberst Edgar Petersen stood with his hands behind his back, staring at an empty space on the floor where the Mustang had once rested. The metal frame used to secure it still bore oil stains, ghost traces of the machine that had haunted them for half a year. The lessons it taught were clearer now than ever. Germany had mastered flight, America had mastered sustainment. At his side, Otto Behrens, still the chief engineer at Rechlin, was reviewing what had become the last meaningful project of the facility, a hybrid airframe proposal that combined German aerodynamics with design insights drawn from the P-51. The project carried the uninspired codename Project Schwan, the Swan, and, like so many of the Reich's late-war ventures, it was doomed before it began. "We can copy it," said Behrens quietly, tracing his finger along the blueprints. "The laminar wing sections, the cooling system, some we can reproduce, but we cannot build it as they do. Not fast enough. Not precisely enough." Petersen nodded. "We can imitate the form, not the philosophy." The men looked out across the tarmac. A truck convoy passed, carrying jerrycans of precious aviation fuel to the east. Above them, contrails stretched toward Berlin. They could not see the aircraft, but they knew their names now as if they were constants of nature: Mustang, Thunderbolt, Fortress, each a symbol not of superiority, but of scale. Hans-Werner Lerche, his test pilot's jacket now faded and frayed, joined them by the door. His face was lined by exhaustion, the kind that comes not from flight hours, but from futility. "I flew the Dora this morning," he said. "She's good, better than we deserve. But even if we had 1,000, it wouldn't matter. They're above us before we even start our engines." Behrens handed him a cigarette. "You remember what you said back in February? That the Mustang was from the future?" Lerche smiled bitterly. "Yes, I was wrong. It is the future." That afternoon, the engineers gathered for what Petersen called the final seminar. It was half technical debriefing, half confession. Charts were tacked to the wall. Performance comparisons, engine efficiency graphs, altitude envelopes. The room was hot, the windows sealed by blackout curtains. Behrens spoke first, his voice steady. "We studied the American Mustang to understand how it flies so far, so fast, so easily. What we discovered was not magic, it was precision. Each part is made to tolerances we cannot maintain with our current industry. The radiator, for instance, its ducting alone is a masterwork of thermodynamics. It converts waste heat to thrust, not drag. In our fighters, that same heat kills engines." He pointed to a chart comparing fuel consumption. "Their Merlin engine burns higher octane fuel. Yes, but the secret is consistency. They can refuel anywhere and receive the same quality gasoline. We cannot. Our synthetic fuel varies from batch to batch. Sometimes our engines detonate under power simply because the chemistry changed." The officers in the room listened in silence. One of them, a young lieutenant recently arrived from the front, finally asked, "Could we ever build something equal?" Petersen answered before Behrens could. "Not now. Perhaps not ever. You see, gentlemen, this was never a contest of wings. It was a contest of systems. They produce airplanes the way we produce rifles." Lerche leaned back in his chair. "And now we're fighting a nation that builds rifles by the million." As evening fell, thunderclouds gathered over the airfield. From far off came the muffled rumble of artillery, distant, but closer than before. The war was moving toward them, mile by mile. After the meeting, Petersen walked alone along the runway. The air smelled of rain and oil. He stopped where the concrete ended and the grass began, looking up at the grey sky streaked with contrails. For a moment, he imagined he could hear it again, the steady purr of the Mustang's Merlin engine, that calm, confident hum that had filled the Rechlin sky months earlier. He thought of the reports from Normandy, Mustangs strafing convoys, diving on supply trains, escorting bombers with impunity. They had done what they were built to do, stay in the air when nothing else could. A single line from Behrens's last report came back to him. "The future belongs to those who solve the equation of distance." Petersen exhaled. The horizon flickered with lightning, and we, he murmured, never solved it. By midnight, Rechlin's generators were running low on fuel. The test teams were preparing to evacuate, taking with them blueprints, logbooks, and fragments of the captured aircraft that had taught them so much. Yet, as they loaded the trucks, none of them could shake the feeling that they were packing relics, not research. The Mustang had come to them by accident. It left them with revelation, and as the bombs of the Allied air fleets rolled eastward, the engineers of Rechlin understood that their world, the world of precision without abundance, was ending. The next morning, the first American reconnaissance flight passed high above Rechlin. The ground crews looked up briefly at the silver shape overhead, small but unmistakable. It banked once, sunlight flashing off its wings, and vanished into the clouds. "It's the same one," Lerche said quietly. "It's come to collect its shadow." No one answered. The wind moved through the grass, and for the first time, the airfield that had once tested the limits of flight seemed utterly still. By August, the war had turned irrevocably against Germany. The radio brought nothing but retreat, Cayenne fallen, Paris in revolt, Soviet tanks rolling toward Warsaw. Rechlin, once the heart of German aviation science, now existed in a kind of twilight. Its workshops still clattered with tools, but the sound was hollow, the work perfunctory. Most of the engineers knew the end was coming. They worked not to win, but to preserve knowledge, as if building a time capsule for a future that might one day understand them. The hangars stood half empty. The captured Mustang's space was still cordoned off, though the aircraft itself had long been sent to Leyers for storage. Yet the men spoke of it as if it were still there, a phantom presence haunting every new test flight. They called it Der Geist von Rechlin, the ghost of Rechlin. It had become a symbol, not of an enemy machine, but of an idea, that the future of flight no longer belonged to the nation that invented it, but to the one that could multiply it. Oberst Edgar Petersen spent much of his time in the administrative offices now, dealing with orders that no longer made sense requests from Berlin for urgent evaluations of advanced projects that would never reach production. Paperwork was the last illusion of control. Each morning, he signed requisitions for fuel and parts that would never arrive, while outside, the runways cracked under disuse. One afternoon, a courier arrived by motorcycle from Leyers, carrying a small crate marked RLM Technische Sammlung. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a single piece of the Mustang's radiator, ducting the famous Meredith-effect system the engineers had studied so obsessively months earlier. A note was attached. Returned per instruction. Storage facility compromised by air raid. Petersen turned the metal piece over in his hands. It was unremarkable, a curved aluminum segment, polished smooth by heat and time, but to him it felt like scripture. He called for Otto Behrens, who arrived within minutes, still in his oil-stained overalls. Together they set the piece on a bench under a lamp. "It survived," Behrens said softly. "Of course it did," Petersen replied. "It always does." They studied it in silence. The duct was simple, too simple, almost, but that was the genius of it. It took what every other engine wasted and made it work harder. A metaphor, Petersen thought, for an entire nation's difference. Germany had built marvels that demanded perfection. America had built machines that endured imperfection. Behrens finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, "about why they could do this. Not just resources, not just factories. It's their philosophy. They build for the man, not the machine. Their aircraft forgives mistakes, ours punishes them." Petersen nodded. "They design for thousands of pilots, not one ace." "And that," Behrens said, "is why they have an air force, and we have legends." That evening, Hans-Werner Lerche returned from a test flight in one of the last Für 190Ds still airworthy. His face was drawn, his eyes red from the engine fumes that now leaked through worn seals. He joined the two men at the bench, staring at the curved radiator piece. "Do you remember when we first took the Mustang apart?" Lerche asked. "We thought we could copy it. I even imagined one day we'd fly our own version against theirs." Behrens smiled faintly. "We did copy it on paper, and the Americans built 1,000 more before we finished drawing ours." Lerche sat down heavily. "Then it was never really about design." "No," Petersen said. It was about direction. They sat in silence as the evening deepened. Outside, the low rumble of bombers echoed from far to the west. Every sound now was distant thunder, the war approaching from all sides. Behrens opened his notebook, flipping to a page filled with sketches and notes. "If anyone ever finds this after the war," he said quietly, "they'll see what we understood too late. The Mustang wasn't a masterpiece of innovation. It was a masterpiece of integration. Everything about it worked together. That's what made it invincible." Petersen looked out through the hangar doors, where the last light of sunset bled across the cracked runway. "Integration," he repeated. "We built in silos, they built in systems." That night, the three men stayed in the hangar long after curfew, the single lamp casting their shadows across the workbench. They talked not of victory or survival, but of inevitability, of how history favored those who could translate invention into industry. Before leaving, Petersen picked up the radiator piece once more. He set it on a shelf beside a small German flight instrument, the two artifacts side by side, one a relic of craftsmanship, the other of progress. "This," he said quietly, "is the line between yesterday and tomorrow." Behrens nodded, "And we stood on the wrong side of it." When they left the hangar, the night sky glowed faintly red to the west fires from the Ruhr industrial basin, burning through the dark. High above, the steady drone of engines passed over Rechlin once again. The men paused, looking up. "They're not even challenged anymore," Lerche said softly. "They don't have to be," Petersen replied. The sound faded into the distance, leaving only the wind over the empty airfield. In the darkened hangar, the returned fragment of the Mustang's radiator caught a sliver of moonlight and gleamed faintly cold, perfect, eternal. To the men of Rechlin, it no longer represented an enemy machine. It was a monument to the future one forged not in secret laboratories, but in assembly lines that never slept. The ghost of the Mustang remained, whispering to those who had once believed they led the world. The future is not built by brilliance alone, but by those who can build brilliance again and again.